flying to Kathmandu, and it seems like you've been flying for days, but you finally get there and skim low over over all the buildings. It's pretty exciting. It's like arriving into an ancient city. Kathmandu has grown to be quite a sprawling city, but it does have a lot of medieval buildings in different centres around the city, and it really is an exotic and faraway pace feeling to it.
The significant sort of character of the walk-in all the way is that it goes over so many huge ridges. I mean, and they're dry and dusty ridges with lots of cottages and farmlets on them, and they're really big climbs. And I have to talk in metres, but it's 400 metres up, 300 metres down, 600 metres up, 200 metres down, 200 metres up, 600 metres down. And so all the time you're gaining in altitude and you're traversing this amazing country, and every day you get these amazing views, and then you go down to the village and the valley floor and cross the river, and then you go all the way up again. So it's a walk-in that has a big character, but not a lot of people do it these days.
It's an airstrip that's inclined at about, I think it's around 35 degrees or so, 30, 35 degrees at its steepest. And it's there to help the planes decelerate, because if you had it just at a much lesser angle, you'd probably crash into a cliff that's behind the airport. But having it at such a steep angle helps the planes decelerate really quickly on that ramp as it goes up towards the holding area for the aircraft and where people get off the aircraft. But it's mostly terrifying in that it just looks like you're flying into a small sort of open area on the side of a valley, and it looks almost like you're flying into a cliff. The first time I arrived in base camp, I think I was pretty underwhelmed. I think that I had anticipated that I would see the rooftop of the world. It would be remarkably open, easy to see all the dramatic places that I'd read about for years. I'd be able to take a step into the mythology that I'd created in my own mind that I would see. And the truth of the matter is that you're in this large horseshoe-shaped valley. You can't see the top of the mountain, you can't see the mountain that's adjacent to it, Lhotse, which is the fourth highest peak in the world. You can't really see the top of that. And you can see on the other side of Everest, you can maybe nearly see the top of the peak of Nuptse, which is a 7,000 meter peak. But it really, you can't see a lot. As you move up towards the center of the ice fall, things definitely become more broken up. You have, in some cases, large ice seracs or ice towers that are above your head at some points. It can be very intimidating traveling in some of the trenches with a 30, 40-foot ice wall above your head. You may be traveling across horizontal ladders, slightly inclined ladders, or vertical ladders to get over some of the obstacles there. And as you start to approach Camp 1, usually you reach the biggest of those ladders. Some of them can be as much as 10-foot sections of aluminum extension ladder lashed together and set up against a tower or set across a crevasse. So it's a very intimidating place in that regard. But as you start to get in sight of Camp 1, you can see that the worst of it's behind you. You can see that things start to open up above you, and that the crevasses start to become much more diminished in number. And I think that that's certainly a huge relief.
Camp 1 is feels like a reasonably flat part of the glacier with towering walls on either side of the valley around you, but the crevasses around you are very deep. So you've got big folds in the glacier there. And so whilst where the tents are is nice and safe, you need to be really careful if you were out wandering around that you're aware of all the big crevasses all around. When you get to Camp 1, it's quite a long way from where snow from above could come down and affect the camp. But then once you got there, you're like, oh, right, a big avalanche could actually arrive here and affect us. So that's definitely a hazard that you don't want to hang around here too long.
Everest is definitely known as a mountain of extremes. And, certainly on the summit, everyone's heard about the intense wind, the jet stream winds that sometimes descend on the peak, but also the intense cold, which can drop to below -40. But people don't always know about the heat that can feel like above 90 degrees Fahrenheit when you're traveling up the western Coombe without a breath of wind, without any possibility of having any shade. So, you're just as apt to have heat exhaustion as you are to have hypothermia on a mountain like this.
When you get to Camp 2, it's up under the west face of Everest and has amazing views of the whole of the Lhotse face. You can't quite see the summit from there, but you can certainly hear the wind howling up high if there's high wind, and so you're definitely getting close to your objective. And Camp 2 is a bit more of a substantial camp in that you do spend a few days there, so it's a little bit more comfortable with a mess tent where you eat your meals together with your team and you try and spend time there resting.
First night at Camp 3 is always known as a horrible night because people will have headaches and feel sick and not want to eat, and they'll just feel miserable and they won't sleep. And when you're on the summit push, you'll pretty much always have a night at Camp 3. And from Camp 3, many expeditions put on their oxygen. In fact, most expeditions put on their oxygen. And some people sleep on oxygen at Camp 3. So that they get a really good night, because they've got to get a good night because the next night they won't be going to sleep because they'll be climbing Mt Everest. There are some bodies still on the South Pole, but one of the things that happens to bodies at altitude, whether you're talking at base camp or on high on the mountain, is that they desiccate. We dry out, which is one of the reasons why you have to keep drinking when you're climbing at altitude. And our bodies desiccate and dry out and become, and become flattened, like an animal's body does, even lower down. So the bodies don't stay. There's only a couple of bodies that may not have been carried down, very, very few, and they basically end up disappearing into the snow and ice. And occasionally people say, oh my God, you just walked right past that body. I mean, when we say right past, it's still 20 meters away, 50 meters away, but all you can see is a tiny bit of a blue jacket in the snow and ice. It's not like there's a fresh body lying on the ground. Having said that, somebody died on my last ascent. Somebody died probably that morning or the night before, and was there on the 6 ropes, and we had to pass him, and his body was taken down later that day, but that was a very sobering reminder. So you either might see a jacket that, merged into the ice and snow 100 meters away that somebody says is an old body, but you're never really sure, or you might occasionally see somebody fresh or wrapped up in a tent or in a jacket because they've died and people have covered them up before they bring their body down to the South Pole. So it's not hugely common, but it does happen.
You've hopefully arrived there not having spent all your energy getting there. You need to have some energy in reserve. So and when you arrive there, you're using oxygen, and you really are up at 8,000 meters. So any movements you make, if you don't have your oxygen on, you really feel it. Your heart rate jumps up and you get quite short of breath quite quickly. So you're very aware you're right at the limit of where humans can be. And of course there's all the pending excitement about the coming day, summit day, if it is to be the next day.
Nowadays, if you're climbing it and you leave a little bit earlier in the night and you're on oxygen, you climb it much faster. So you get there early in the morning and the light is fantastic. Like you're climbing up the mountain below the south summit of Everest is quite steep, and dawn is coming and you can see the curvature of the earth, and the light of the sun streaks out horizontally around the edge of the curve of the earth, and then the mountains that are still 8,000 meter mountains and 7,000 meter mountains are all below you, and they're lit up. Just their shapes are coming out of the gloom, and oh my God, it's the most beautiful view.